Uniting together for one common threat, here's your look at the new Hasbro Marvel Legends House of X Cyclops. Cyclops assembles a team of mutants to destroy the Mother Mold and vanquish the Sentinel threats. Before we get a closer look at Cyclops, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. Taking the tape measure to the very top of his head, right there, we're going to stop the tape measure, just like that. And according to the readouts, you're looking at Cyclops standing 6.3 inches in height. Let's switch that to centimeters, revealing that the figure of Cyclops is 16.2 centimeters tall. Not going to bring them all in, but here's a couple of size comparisons of previous Marvel Legends figures that we've looked at from this wave. There's Omega Sentinel. We can also bring in Marvel Girl. And just recently, we also had a look at Professor X. What a disappointing figure that was. Doesn't even stand properly. There we go. And get Sentinel there. Kind of give you a good rough idea. It's not until really you compare it over to Cyclops do you see how a smaller frame is really represented by all the other figures. Cyclops goes back to basics with using a more traditional Marvel Legends body, something of which I really wish that Professor X could have had himself. Okay, so the figure doesn't really come with all that much. Also, if you had managed to pick up the Vintage Collection X Factor Cyclops, you'll probably recognize many of the accessories that come included with this figure. He gets a lot of reuses. What he doesn't get as a reuse certainly is the Build-A-Figure piece needed to build and finish off our Tri-Sentinel. And in this case, we've got ourselves the other arm. Bringing in where we've left off so far, this is what the Tri-Sentinel looks like. Basically just the torso, the legs, and the arm. We can go ahead and then add the other arm. Just pop that into place like that. You know, I will say, I'm not sure really on how well this thing's going to actually stand. But I will say, applying the limbs, the legs so far, I've had no issues whatsoever. I haven't even had to heat these. Just pop them back into place. And like I said, they've stayed pretty good all in there. The only thing we have left still to do, as you can see, there's the 3 holes located along the top there. Once we have a look at Magneto, we're then going to go ahead and take those 3 heads and pop them in place. And then we've got ourselves a finished Tri-Sentinel. But looking at the rest of Cyclops' accessories, let's have a look at his swappable head sculpt. I really like this one. And yeah, even though it has been reused from that Vintage Collection X Factor Cyclops, I never got that Cyclops, so I welcome the idea that we get something like that with this release. You can see the facial expression is a little bit more aggressive here on Cyclops. Can't help but notice, though, if you look at his nose and you look at his chin, there's some additional flakes and flecks of plastic. Unfortunately, has made it to the surface. I do like the visor painted nicely in silver. There's a little bit of red that's carried its way down. I almost, for a second, thought it was a little bit of silver that's chipped off. But I think instead, it's just a little bit of red paint. Now you can see here on the side, the fanning out here, this star formation, so to speak. This is basically going to be the excess optic blast, as of course the beam projects out from the front. Overall, though, a nice looking head sculpt, though. On the side, though, and I've noticed this more so with the defaulted head sculpt that I'll talk about in a second, there's all this sort of texturing here on the side. Doesn't look as bad on this one, but you'll see what I mean when we look at the defaulted head sculpt. But this is the alternate, and then, of course, to go along with that, you get the optic blast beam. Try saying that several times fast. Again, it's just been reused from the original Vintage Collection Cyclops, and all it is basically there's a little tab here on the end, and of course you're going to fit that into the slot just like that. And you get yourself a pretty impressive looking way to display the head. If you are curious, flip it around. It can technically go the other way as well. Which I guess is good if you want to display the figure kind of looking down. Like if you're looking up at it, I suppose, you can see more of the waves of the beam projecting out. It's all a matter of which angle that you want to look at Cyclops. Especially if you're somebody that's into figure photography, you may actually prefer to have this flip the other way. Again, if you want to show it from the bottom. There you go. But I do like the fact that you can swap that around. Most people probably will simply just display it like this, because that probably is the most, I would imagine, most odds-on favorite, I'm sure, for most people. But anyways, he does come with a clue with that. We'll kind of keep that on for the time being. It looks a little strange, me just holding it like almost like a lollipop. We're going to put that to the side. We'll go back to that, don't worry. Go go back to that. But let's have a look, though, at Cyclops. Decent looking figure. A lot of things, of course, on this guy gets reused. Primarily, more so is the fact that the body, I mean, these bodies, this specific body has been reused several times over the years, and that's an understatement. As I move further down on the figure, people are probably asking where you're going with this. He does have really tiny feet. Remarkably tiny little tootsies. Now, it's not unique to Cyclops. You would think by now that they would realize for themselves, hey, if we're going to continue to use this mold, we would probably best do ourselves the service of making the feet a little bit larger, because those are tiny little feet. I mean, they're almost like the size of his hands. Little tiny feet. And they're really difficult as well, because they are so small. I don't want to spend a whole review talking about Cyclops' tiny little feet. But because they are so small, yes, it's going to cause some problems getting this guy to stand. At least he does have the peg holes on the undersides of his feet. But yeah, they're really tiny. I mean, they're almost to the point where you look at the calves and they go right into the feet. He's got his own cankles. Anyways, looking at the head sculpt once again, I do like this head sculpt. I like the fact also, when it comes to his visor, the red strip that's on there is recessed. Gives a little level of depth to it. Paint generally, for the most part, is pretty clean. I got like a little speck there on the side of his face. But other than that, I have no real qualms when it comes to necessarily the head sculpt here. Perhaps I would say maybe the skin tone seems off, but it could be just simply the light shining down on it. Maybe in person. I mean, in person, if I'm looking at it right now, it doesn't look maybe as bad as it does on camera. Going back to a point I had mentioned earlier, though, you can see like all these little textured grooves on the side. It probably is just a result of the way it was molded, but looking at it from the side, it kind of looks a little bit like it's been 3D printed, especially when you see it from this side right here. That could just be a case of caked on paint, because of course they had to paint the silver on the side and the same matching silver on the front of the visor. No real complaints I would definitely make about this particular head sculpt. Looking again at the rest of the body, standard fare here. Can't help but notice that the plastic that they use for the arms seems like a slightly darker shade than it is for the torso. You even see it here also in the legs. The torso definitely stands out as a lighter, almost even more purple shade to the more darker, blacker color, as you can see on the legs, or on the arms here, and on the legs. Still, though, I have to give points for the fact they actually took the time and added a little bit of panel lining. Professor X, I'm looking in your direction. Come on, seriously. This guy had no paint whatsoever, and yet Cyclops sports it. It's everywhere, across his chest, across his arms, and of course all across his legs as well. Paint generally is pretty clean, though. A few little areas, a little hiccups, of course, but that can't be on every single figure, but I will mention it here on mine. There's a few little areas, yeah, where the paint looks like it's flaked off, or it doesn't look like it had a complete band, a very clean line applied. But at least it's a good-looking figure where I will welcome the fact that it does have paint. Because, of course, it's using a standard Marvel Legends body. It does have still the peg hole on the back for a supplied cape. Of course, everybody knows Cyclops doesn't wear capes. That's not his thing. What is his thing, though, is wearing a very pocketed belt. Something I'm sure Rob Liefeld would have initially designed in the 80s. No, that's not true. He would have had pockets all over the legs, all over the arms, and everything else. The belt is pretty nicely done. The X logo done on the front, done in silver, with the background done in almost like a burgundy red. And we just move Cyclops' arms out of the way. You can see a nice work done to the pockets, where even each top of the snap of the flap, let's try saying that 3 times fast, you can also see that it's got some nice silver added to it. Why again? I hate to keep going back to the same talking point. Why does this guy get so much paint? And yet Professor X got squat. He literally had nothing. Going a little again further down, short of his feet being one big issue with this figure, I really don't have any necessary problems with this particular release of Cyclops. Again, very familiar looking Cyclops. A lot of the features carried over from previous Cyclops figures, mainly the vintage X-Factor figure. Really, you see a lot of that getting reused, specifically, again, when it comes to this alternate head sculpt that I'm just sort of waving around right now. You know what? Let's go ahead and pop the head sculpt off, because we've looked at this one enough. Just go ahead and pop that off. I must say there's something satisfying about popping off a Marvel Legends head, because the ball joint is so large and because the socket is so easy to remove. You get always that nice little satisfying as you take off the head sculpt. Let's maybe take off the optic beam for the time being, and we'll put the head sculpt on. Again, if you have any issues, I find it always helps to bring the ball joint as far back as you can get it, because it gives you just a little bit of leverage. It guarantees that that's not going to be popping off, or certainly when you are putting it down this way, sometimes if the hinge joint is super loose, you're going to have the head flop back and forth. Now that just looks a little awkward. When you are putting the head sculpt on, of course, be mindful of these side pieces. They're done of a translucent red plastic. And then, of course, to finish off the look, we take the optic beam and attach that to his head sculpt. And boy, does that look ever super cool. Probably going to be the way I'm going to display this figure. I'd still really like to go back and get that vintage X-Factor Cyclops. He's probably a little bit more expensive right now. And probably display that one with the defaulted head sculpt. And instead display this particular Cyclops with the more aggressive optic blasting head sculpt instead. Taking the beam off to look at the posability on the figure, Cyclops' head rotates all the way around. All the way around. It hinges down. It hinges up, and of course you can also rock it back and forth this way as well. He has an upper torso crunch that allows the torso to go down this far, and also to go back this far, and you can also rotate the waist all the way around. A little on the loose side, not super loose, but I'm sure if I progressively keep doing this, yeah, it will get more and more looser. I'm probably just going to leave it at that. The arms hinge out. I would almost even say a little bit past the point of 90 degrees, but I think that's being overly generous. I think it's still a 90-degree angle bend. You can rotate the arms all the way around this way, swivel on the bicep all the way around this way, and a double hinge on the elbow. You can also rotate the hand all the way around this way as well with a hinge back and forth. One thing I didn't really mention in this review that I can mention quickly here in this part of this review is the fact that he does have only these hands, just the one closed fist, and just, of course, the optic emitting fingers on this hand right here. It doesn't come with any other swappable options. I thought perhaps I could maybe use the one that came with the Phantom X Professor X. Not the case. The hands are a little bit too small. Also with this, the articulation being what it is, it has a hinge joint right here and it has a hinge joint right there. So in theory, you should be able to bring the hand up and, of course, give him that signature look. For that, you will want to bring the hand down, bend it down, because, of course, there's that hinge right there. And you can bring the hand inward. It doesn't quite fully reach it. Even just bending it, it's close enough. You almost even have to have it a little bit further forward for him to quite, to give you a perfect connection. If you bring it a little bit further back, it just doesn't, it gives you just a little bit of a space in between. But it's close enough, I suppose. Then we look at the legs here. Let's bring his arms down for a second. His legs split out. Ooh, that's got to be uncomfortable. Bring the legs forward and back. He has a 3/4 of the way up swivel cut on the thigh. He has a double hinge on the knee. Despite for the fact that this may look like one continuous piece of plastic, or at least this piece right here, he does have a swivel cut in the boot area. You really can't do too much with that. But at least he does have it, and you can also hinge his little tiny feet. Look at the size of those things. They're so small. And you can also move that back and forth this way as well. Good-looking Cyclops. I wouldn't say anything really new brought to the table. Certainly the things that are new to this figure, well, I should say certainly the accessories that are brought to the table for this figure are simply just reuses. These are things that we've gotten before. Still, I like the idea of getting another Cyclops, one of my personal favorites of the X-Men. I always feel like he gets underappreciated. I do feel like this figure turned out really nice and a prime example of what you can do when you don't phone it in. I mean, for the fact that he does have as much panel lining as he does, I know I'm going to say it one last time. Why, oh, why wasn't this included when we had a look at that Professor X figure earlier? I don't really feel like Hasbro had to reinvent the wheel with yet another Cyclops release. People that have been long time collecting the Marvel Legends, and specifically a hooded Cyclops, will probably recognize a lot of samesies being brought to the table, like this particular body with really tiny little feet. Even the included swappable head with the optic blast beam, as said, had come already included with another Cyclops. So like I said, you're really not getting anything new here. What you are still getting, though, is a very safe Cyclops, and there's nothing really wrong with that. It's a good-looking figure with cleanly applied paint. He has pockets, and he has an optic blast beam, and that's more than enough for me. I will say at least he does things a lot better than the Professor X that I really dissed a lot about. But at least this one has a prime example of what you can possibly do if you want to put a little bit of effort into it. I feel like more effort was made into this figure, even though technically, yeah, a lot of it was just reused from earlier figures, but at least it was done in a right way then, and it's still done in a right way now with this Cyclops release. This now leaves one figure down before we're going to finally finish off our Tri-Sentinel, and that is, of course, Magneto. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying these Marvel Legends reviews. If you are new to this channel and you're enjoying, I almost thought he was going to fall over for a second. If you're enjoying the content you're seeing here, and especially digging the fact that we're back into doing Marvel Legends full time, make sure you're hitting the subscribe button down below if you haven't done so already, that you're turning on the bell notification if you haven't done so already, and keep your peepers peeled, because not only are we going to be wrapping up the review of this particular wave of Marvel Legends, but there's definitely going to be a lot more videos coming your way as well. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.